I'm very pleased to introduce our invited speaker, Ed Dixon from the University of Pennsylvania, which is not in College Station, or State College. It's in that other kind of bigger city. You know what I'm talking about, that other biggest city in Pennsylvania? It starts with a PH. That's where the University of Pennsylvania is. For those who might be confused, there's another smaller college in State College. So, Ed is the director of technology at the Penn Language Center, which is a fantastic language center in the pantheon of language centers. It's one of the best, if not the best. Although the Yale people might tend to disagree, but he's active in a variety of areas related to classroom instruction and faculty training with technology. He presents regularly on panels and presentations at regional, national, and international conferences. Professor Dixon is president of the Northeast Association of Language Learning and Technology, NEO, and taught in the summer of 2010 the first fully online distance learning course in a foreign language for credit from UPenn, and that was for credit, you heard that. In 2011, Professor Dixon received Penn's Affiliated Faculty Award for Distinguished Teaching in the College of Liberal and Professional Studies. I had the great pleasure of meeting and attending a workshop he gave when I was in New Haven. Fantastic. Unfortunately, we only have him for an hour today. We'll try to get him back in the future. I don't know what you think about that, but given the snow in this late stage of the game, maybe it's scary, but it's an adventure. It's an adventure. In this week of horrific violence, I think it behooves us to recommit to international education. And in light of that, I'd like to read one statement that Dr. Dixon made in a recent interview. He said, "The implications of community-based language instruction made possible through the affordances of social media and the development of online communities without boundaries are widespread and range from experiencing language learning as a social process rather than merely a subject that one studies, to potentially providing students with access to cultural exchanges with their peers worldwide." This is the real deal, and I'm again so thankful he came all the way, braved all that air travel and bad weather and so forth. Ed Dixon.
Well, I want to thank Mark for that really very generous introduction. And I also want to thank his crew, the two Courtney, the Beige, and then also Sarah Vicky, who is organized this webinar through ALTEC. People will be seeing this in the remote site. But without further ado, I'd like to begin. Part of my talk is canned, and part of it will be ad-lib. So I hope that the combination of the both works out well. So we're here looking at this site here. The online courses that I teach and others that are offered at Penn are part of a growing trend in online education towards community-centered learning. So let me change this PowerPoint here. For a second, I'll get you to this. Good. So, yeah, we're in our fourth year of teaching live online language courses, and we'll be offering this summer 11 in Arabic, Chinese, Korean, Italian, German, and Polish. Italian and Polish. These courses adhere to the principles and goals of communicative language teaching, but achieve them beyond the scope of the traditional face-to-face classroom through innovative network-enhanced pedagogies. And let me. The tools used to support the online learning environment are synchronous two-way web conferencing software by Adobe Connect, Blackboard, Windows voice boards, blogs, wikis, Google Docs, and Facebook. As the German instructor for 2 of these online courses, Elementary German 1 and Elementary German 2, I teach the same courses face-to-face, with many assignments being the same in both. At this point, I would like to give you a few examples of the assignments from both formats and show how the results are similar and different. I hope also to show how some of the teaching and learning strategies from the online courses are now enhancing those of the traditional face-to-face courses that I've been teaching. I hope everybody on the remote end can hear me too, so I'm just going to be keep going here. The 2 essays on page 1 that our participants here in the room in Boulder can see, and that our remote reviewers can see on the PowerPoint slide here, are examples of the work of 2 of the best students who are writing the same assignment, but the one student's assignment is from the face-to-face, and the other is from the online class. Now, I know you all don't know German, but the thing about it is you can see that there's a lot of content there. And for those of you who are looking at the hard copy, you can see that there is more content. And I won't going to be able to analyze all of the content, but my feeling is that the student who is writing in the online class seems to have taken more ownership of the narration that she's giving, and has also looked up a lot of words that were not contained in the original story. So these are things to be looked at. But so for this assignment, the students first read a story about the life of Lisa. It's a fictitious character from a German children's story who grew up and experienced in Berlin the major events of German history in the 20th century. The students then narrated the story from the perspective of Lisa, that is from the perspective of the first person singular. Now, with regards to the linguistic accuracy, both essays show correct usage of nominative, accusative, dative, and genitive case endings and pronouns, subordinating word order, the simple past and the present perfect, infinitival phrases, relative clauses, comparative endings, active and passive voice. These are some of the basic points that the students need to master in order to continue their language study at the intermediate level. At this point, I'd like to answer one of the questions from our webinar audience who asked the students continue after the online courses with German at the intermediate level in the face-to-face classroom. The answer to that is yes. I've taught approximately 25 students who completed the summer courses in the last 3 years. Of the 25 students, approximately 6 continued, and all but 1 successfully completed the 2-semester intermediate courses. The one who didn't dropped the course in the 2nd semester because of chronic absences. 2 of the students were excellent, and another one went on to Germany for a semester abroad through a day scholarship. So the point to be made here is that the students are able to transition not only from the elementary courses to the intermediate level, but also from the online class to the face-to-face class. As I mentioned earlier, the courses are based on the goals and the principles of communicative language teaching, but I am also fully aware of the requirements that the students need to fulfill in order to be placed in an intermediate course of 10. Hence, these courses are very much embedded in the curriculum of the German Department's language program, and I teach them accordingly. Now, I'd like to get to you, talk to you a little bit about feedback. That was also a question that came through from the webinar audience, and it has much to do with with this particular essay that's in front of you. There are still a few errors in both essays, but both reflect a fairly high degree of accuracy. However, the way in which the students achieve that accuracy differs. Moving the PowerPoint here. Go. So the way in which I gave the students the feedback was different. In the face-to-face course, students were provided a key containing a list of abbreviations that indicated their errors. I would then place an abbreviation behind the error, and students would self-correct. So here's an example of the key that you see here. This method of feedback was also used in the online course, but because of the amount of output that the students produced in the blogs, the Facebook, the Google Voice boards, and Google Docs, I needed to come up with another method of correcting the essays that would be less time-consuming. So instead of firstly providing students with a key like this one that you see here on the PowerPoint that focused on discrete error correction, I first read the essays to check for the most reoccurring errors. Students were then given global feedback based on the most reoccurring errors, I would then ask them to self-correct by requiring them to reread their essays and look for the errors that I indicated in the feedback. Often I showed a student's essay, of course first with permission of that student, to review with the entire class parts of the essay where improvements could be made. In this way, the students' work became the content for group activities, whereby I called upon students to collaborate and work together to identify and remedy errors. I now use this method also in the face-to-face classroom. Now I'd like to turn to how the students experience this kind of feedback. I'm doing surveys now, getting their responses. I want to see how they experience the online class. And in response to the following question, in response to the following question, was the online learning environment effective for feedback from the instructor and your peers for you to self-correct and work and reflect on correct language usage? And this is what the student wrote. One of the things I enjoyed most about the assignments of this course was that they were based on the idea of self-correction. All of the assignments were able to be viewed or heard by the rest of the class. So I think we all got the sense that it was a group effort and that we were all there to support each other and help our classmates. The WIMBA voice boards were the perfect opportunity for self-correction because I could go back and listen to what I had recorded and determine for myself if I was accurate and intelligible, or if my response didn't make grammatical sense. We were always required to reread our essays after submitting them and to correct any mistakes that were found. This was extremely helpful because I often found several mistakes that I had made the first time around. The instructor would often base the contents of his lecture on reviewing common mistakes made by the class in the essays. So this really highlighted what we should be looking for in our self-correction phase of the assignment. So this is how I intended it, and this is how the student experienced it. Now I'd like to turn our discussion, this is one of my favorite aspects of the course, of the online classroom within the context of it as being an authentic learning environment. The online learning environment and that of the traditional classroom environment differ with respect to where the students are participating. In the online classroom, they can be anywhere in the world. They can be in their living rooms, in their offices, and even in Starbucks. And you can see here, during the first year, there was a student in China. And in the second year, they were in anywhere from Paris to New York City. And last year, they were New York City, Los Angeles, and Toronto. So they were everywhere in participating in this class. Now, at the bottom of page 2, and here I'll put this on the. At the bottom of page 2 and on the PowerPoint, you'll see a picture of a student sitting on a couch with a computer. This picture is one of the ads used by the university to advertise the online course, or courses, I should say now. When I first saw this picture, I thought it was a bit of an exaggeration of how the students would be participating online, but during a warm-up exercise, I was proven wrong. And as you can see here, the warm-up exercise, and I asked the student, how are you doing today? She said, I'm doing well, and you? I said, I'm also doing well. Where are you at the moment, I asked. And she says, I'm at home in my living room. Oops. I'm at home in my living room. And I say, where in the living room? And she says, on the couch. So they are actually, but the point to be made here too, is if I can, the point to be made here is that the students are learning in an environment which feels for some more natural to them. Consequently, I think their language output in conversations about, for example, where they live, tends to be more authentic and relevant to the students than classroom activities that require them to practice language by describing objects in a textbook. The last observation about the authenticity of the online classroom is borne out in a student response to the following survey. question that I asked. So let me bring that survey question up. So in other words, we are not using this kind of realia for the students to describe where they are. When they are in their rooms, they're describing actually the objects that are around them at that space. They're sharing this kind of information. Now, I wanted to point out to you the question that I asked the students that bears out how the students are experiencing this environment. What were the benefits of having the opportunity to learn language online versus those in the face-to-face classroom? Although I was initially worried that I would not learn as much from an online language course, I quickly found that the relaxed environment of sitting in my own home and not feeling the pressure of an entire class staring at me allowed me to engage and take more risks with the language. Another comment. The content of our dialogue was also an improvement from a face-to-face classroom because each student was learning in a different setting. Some students were at home, others in their office, some were in different time zones, etc. So we always have a variety of answers to the same questions. A question as simple as, what is the weather like, would normally receive 20 similar responses in a normal classroom, but it triggered many different kinds of answers in our online class. Okay, now I'd like to give you an example of an oral interview after the first 2 weeks. We give the students three interviews. I give the first 2 interviews, and at the very end, the director of the program, sort of as an external evaluator, would give the students an interview, and that would attest to their oral abilities. But let me. Okay. So. After the 2 weeks, the student is able to express greetings, describe backgrounds, residence, profession, studies, free time, likes and dislikes, the present tense, basic word order, several prefixes. She's able to recycle vocabulary and self-learn new vocabulary. And I'd like to give you have the example there on your sheets, but I'll bring it up here on the PowerPoint just to give you an example of what is going on in the oral interview. So the student says, hello, Mr. Dixon, and I say, how are you doing today? She says, I'm doing well. And then I say, I'm also doing well, thank you. Where are you at the moment? She says, I'm in New Jersey. Where do you come from? And I come from New Jersey. What is the town called? She says, Medford. Is Medford your hometown? I ask. She says, yes, Medford is my hometown. Is Medford big or small? I say. And she continues here. Medford is very small. She intensifies it by saying very small. Do you have a profession? Do you work? She says, yes, I work as an administrative assistant. These are words that she needed to look up. Where do you work? She said, I work in the University of Pennsylvania. These are summer courses. And then I said, oh, at the University of Pennsylvania, she made a mistake there, so I gave her some feedback. Are you a student? She says, yes, I am a student. And what are you learning this summer? She says, this summer I'm learning German. And do you like learning German? She says, yes, I like learning German. Which languages do you speak? I ask. She says, I speak English, Latin, Greek, and a little German. What do you like to do? I say. And she says, I like to go to the movies, and I like to watch TV, and I like to garden. She uses a word, gärtnern, and I didn't quite understand her. So I asked her in another way. I said, oh, you like to work in the garden? And she responded, yes, I like to work in the garden. The conversation goes on. This is just an excerpt out of it. And I do have the audio if you wanted to listen to it, but I think for the sake of time, I won't play the audio right now. Okay, the question is, how do students develop oral and written communicative competency in an online classroom? And the answer to that is borne out, in part, in the student's response to the following question. How would you explain the difference between your participation and interaction in the face-to-face classroom with your participation and interaction you experience in the online classroom? Let me bring that up here. The student says, there is very little difference, in my opinion, between participating in a language course in a classroom and an online language course. Though I didn't get to see my professor and classmates in person,
conversing, interacting, and practicing the material was pretty much the same. Students can pair up and converse directly. Generally, I felt I was getting the same experience without having to visit a physical classroom. Now, let me just, there's one more comment here. My pronunciation also had to be more accurate because I could not use visuals, for example, hand gestures, to convey my meaning. So I think the point to be made here is that the absence of the student's physical presence in the online environment is offset by the development of a social presence that is unique in the online experience. Also, because of the lack of the physical presence that the student alludes to here, I find that students are much more focused on communicating and describing their personal identities and much more focused on making themselves understandable and comprehensible than students need to be in the traditional classroom. In other words, the students in the online classroom have to work harder. In the online classroom, there are many opportunities for the students to develop their social presence and personal identity through both writing and speaking, but they have to do it with greater degree of accuracy because they don't have the gestures that students frequently rely on in a face-to-face classroom. I'm just going to take a sip of water here. Now I think I'm going to move into more of the ad-lib part of it. So now I want to talk to you a little bit about what the assignments look like in general. Okay, there are 5 blog essays. This is just for 1 semester, not for the 2 semesters, but 5 blog essays. So there would be 10 to get all together for the 2-semester course. 10 Facebook entries, 25 oral assignments, 3 online oral interviews, which I just alluded to. 10 German interactive lessons. We use Deutsch Interactive. It's not a traditional textbook. It's an online textbook, you might say. 2 online practice tests in Deutsch Active, but these are just practice tests. These are not graded tests. 3 short stories. This is in the summer that we read in the 2nd session, and there is an online final. And the online final does test their sort of their accuracy with regards to the grammar and so forth. But it's not the most important part of the course. The emphasis on their competency and not tallying up the scores of tests. Now, let me move on here. Now the evaluation, how does that happen? It's class performance, 200 points in the online classroom. Homework is 200 points, which includes all the Windows baseboard and so forth. The essays are 40 points apiece. Practice interviews, the presentation in Windows, at the end they do sort of a presentation in Windows. There's a final interview, and then there's the final exam in Blackboard. Now, this is what the syllabus looks like, and this is just a one for one day. It took quite a bit of time for me to develop this kind of a syllabus, because what I really wanted to do was not just to give them, okay, these are the things that you're going to be having to do, but I wanted to make it sort of like a lesson plan, so they could easily follow what they were going to be responsible for this day, with regards also to the grammar, and then also with regards to the vocabulary. This is what the Blackboard site looked like that they were using. So everything was here in Blackboard. All of the content was in here. All of the links that they needed. So this is what the Blackboard site appeared like. This is Deutsch Interactive. Deutsch Interactive is designed basically for reading and listening comprehension. So I needed to repurpose that content for writing and speaking. So, but what was nice about it is it had sort of these built-in assessments, so that by the end of the 2 semesters, they can understand the major points of clear standard input of familiar matters, can deal with most situations likely to arise whilst traveling, can produce simple connected text, can describe experiences and events, dreams and hopes. So this is what we expected them to do. In many cases, I think they could even do a little bit more than that. But what I needed to do was repurpose this content so that they would use it interactively in speaking and writing assignments. Now, what did the online classroom, what did the session look like? So I developed this kind of sequence activities where first I would do an in-class presentation, sort of the concepts, the topics, and themes. Then I would work with the students interactively where I would pose questions to them, and they would be responding either in a written format or in a spoken format. So everybody was doing something. Right? There was a lot of interaction going on. I think the participation is much more different in an online classroom than it is in a face-to-face classroom, where maybe one person is raising their hand, but in this case, everybody is doing something. Now, then there was in-class synchronous student activities where they were put in chat rooms, and I'll show you what it looks like, both in written chat rooms and then in oral chat rooms. And then finally, there was the out-of-class asynchronous activities. They were also synchronous if you consider the interviews, they were synchronous. And they interacted with each other, they could see each other's work in the Facebook exercise, and the Wimba, and so forth. So, but the thing about it was it cycled back into the next day's class, so it prepared them also for what we were going to be doing. So the activities were very much aligned with what we were doing in the in-class session. So that even the tools that they were using, they were collaborative tools that they were using as the homework assignments, just as they were collaborative tools we were using in the online sessions. This is what Adobe Connect looks like. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Adobe Connect. So what I would do, there would be a PowerPoint presentation. I would pose questions to them. They would interact with me about what a German breakfast is like, those type of things, those kinds of topics. So it was used in a very contextualized way. We studied and learned the structures in a very contextualized way. And then I would put them into, I also gave them a sort of a handout to keep them on task about the concept that focused basically on the dialogues they would need to use in order to converse with each other. They were very structured dialogues, but then they became more open-ended as the lesson progressed. But let me just move here for a second. And this was really the beauty of Adobe Connect that I found, is that I could create these chat rooms. These were written chats. I would bring them up in Adobe Connect, and I would assign 2 students to each chat room. And this is what it would look like when they were participating with each other. Okay. So I took the names out of the students here, so you can see. So but the point is here, I could see what everybody was talking about. They could also see each other's work. So if they needed some help, or if there was some error correction, I could provide it to them instantaneously. And if they were struggling to look for structures, I would tell them, look over at your partner's work here in the window next door, and maybe you'll get some ideas. So this is one aspect, I think, of the online environment, that it is very collaborative. There's a lot of peer work going on. And this is not, you can't do this in a face-to-face classroom. Well, you could if everybody had computers, but that would be more like a lab, I suppose. Anyway. Moving on here, and then I would put students into the oral chat rooms. And you can't see it here right now because it's in the clouds. But there would be oral chat rooms here, and I would pair the students up. They would continue the conversation or start it over again. And I could bounce around the different chat rooms and listen to what they were doing, and also give them feedback. Now, moving along here, the Wimba voice boards, they also reinforce what we were doing in classrooms. So on day 1, they might be interacting with each other, finding out who they were, what's your name, where do you come from, that type of thing. And the Wimba voice boards were also used to reinforce the kinds of questions and answers that they were practicing in the online sessions. So you're all familiar with Wimba, or how that works? It's just these are Wimba voice boards. It's sort of like written threads, but instead of being written, it's spoken. There was also a Facebook exercises that the students were given regularly. Most of the time, I structured the exercises, and this was their first Facebook entry after the first day of class. So they're putting all of it together, where they're presenting themselves in this sort of like they're presenting making a social presence through the Wimba voice boards. Their pictures aren't here, but I had to take those out, of course, with their names. But you can see here they're saying, my name is, I come from China, I live now in Philadelphia. And Philadelphia is in the northern part of the United States. I speak 3 languages, Chinese, English, and a little German. There are mistakes here, and then what I would do is I would do a global feedback to the students the next day to indicate where the main errors were. So you want to say, my mother language is Chinese, I'm learning German, I have German 4 times a week. So this was, for me, the confirmation that they were learning something when I did this for the first time. Because the first time I taught this course, I couldn't see them. And I came in the next day to my colleague and I said, I don't know what they're learning. I can't see them. And the next day I read this and I suddenly understood. Yes, indeed they are learning. And in the interviews I could see they were learning. They're just learning in a different way. Okay. Oops. I must have said something wrong here. You're probably wondering now how I can teach an online course and I can't do the PowerPoint. Good. That's fine. Thank you. Thank you. So I just want to give you an example. As they're moving along doing these Facebook entries, the content becomes a little bit more complex, right? They're talking about their weekends, they're talking about their occupations. So this becomes like a portfolio for the students. They have all of this content in the blogs, in the Google Docs, in the Facebook, and they can look back at what they can see their progress. And they can also review their work too at the same time for example, the oral interviews. Now, I'll just skip that for right now. I just wanted to give you an example of where they go from writing a very simple essay, the very first essay that they wrote in week 1, and what they're doing by week 12. So here's a very simple essay where they're talking about themselves, but then later on, they're talking about characters in the story. So the content grows, all right, and so you can see that you can see the progression, at least with at this point here, from your vantage point, the length of the content that they're able to produce. Now, we're getting close to the end, and when we do the final interview, these are the rubrics that we use to assess the students. And as I mentioned, Christina Fry in the German department, she does the assessment. She's the director of the language program, and she interviews the students at the end as kind of like as sort of like the external evaluator. Because if I say, oh yeah, they can do this, nobody really knows if that's really the case. So I think it was very important to have somebody external evaluator to assess the students. Now, looking at what they were doing, I'm moving in the wrong direction here. This is the statistics in the Blackboard. So what I was really interested in finding out, what are they doing at home, right? There's 16% of the time they're writing the essays, and 28% of the time they're doing the Wimba voice course. And this is exactly what I want to see. They're not doing workbook exercises, they're doing exercises that requires them to produce language and for me to be able to assess their competency. So it's not tallying up, again, answers to a test, give them a score. It's looking at what they are producing and assessing what they are producing. It's sort of a kind of portfolio management way. Now I'm going to move to the evaluations of the course. This is a sample of evaluations. 4.0 is the highest you can get for the evaluations, and the evaluations scores are pretty high. You can just see that there, and it also, as well. So the other page too, it also exemplified that the evaluation of the students was well received. But what I was really interested in was their commentaries that were part of the evaluation that we would put at the end of the class. So what's the point? I didn't expect to enjoy the online aspect, but I found quickly that in addition to the obvious benefits, such as the ability to be mobile and travel without missing class, I actually thought it was easier to concentrate without the typical distractions of a traditional classroom. And the other student wrote that too as well, where she was talking about, she was less inhibited about volunteering information. So that, because of the fact that students weren't looking at her, is what she said. I was a little apprehensive at first taking an immersion-style class online at that, but this method of teaching really seems to work. The student called it immersion. I didn't call it that, but that was their experience. The online format is perfect for students who cannot attend an in-person class. It is on par with, if not better than, other introductory language courses I've taken in the classroom. Another student writes, the homework, the short stories, and the in-class exercises were all great. Taking this class is sincerely one of my most memorable experiences at Penn. But what I was really interested in here is that they're seeing the homework, the stories, the in-class exercises as sort of one cycle. And that's also sort of the goal that I have, is that they align the activities that they're doing outside of class with the activities that they're doing inside of class, both with the content and the technology. Now, one student writes here, I'm going to skip this one here. I really enjoyed this course. It moved quickly and covered a lot of material, but it wasn't too overwhelming. My favorite part of the class was reading the Elisa. This is the story that you have before you, and the short stories. They provided some German history and culture, which was very interesting and it helped spur my desire to learn the language. It was great to be able to practice reading real German in the course, and it has given me the foundation to work my way through German newspapers and articles. So they walk away with a feeling that they can really work with the language. And that's also important for us to know. Now, what are some of the outcomes that I'm finding here? So there's a shift from the very private to more public spaces. The students can see each other's work, I can see their work. There's less teacher-centered and more community-centered. It's not even just student-centered, I think it's community-centered. There's extensive collaboration and participation. I hope I was able to give some examples of that today. Learning for meaningful and effective communication rather than for passing chapter tests and unit exams. There's more opportunities for self-correction, self-reflection, and peer learning. There's out-of-class activities aligned more closely with the in-class activities. There's more authentic learning of structures by introducing them as the students needed them for conversation and communication. What I mean by that is I did not have to adhere to a textbook sequence of grammar points. I could give the students the structures that they needed, that they wanted to learn as they needed them. And I think that that was also something that came out of the course. There was more authentic learning and a non-threatening learning environment. Now, one thing that I just wanted to bring out here, and one of the, Ian Lancashire points out that the high level of participation in the online classroom through the affordance of different and simultaneous modes of communication confirms Lancashire's view that the tasks in which teachers and students routinely engage in are being uniformly done better online. Now you may not or will not maybe agree with that, but I think after you try this, you may start to see some of the differences. But it's not only saying that one is better than the other. I think what happens is that you learn from both environments, and then you can bring back what you did in the online classroom and enhance what you do in the face-to-face classroom, and vice versa. So it's a two-way street. Now, I'm almost done here, and if you're interested in learning more about how the model actually worked, there is an article, and my email address is eddixon@sas.upenn.edu. Please feel free to write me. And I think that's about it. But some of you are probably asking the question, is it possible to scale this up to a MOOC? And I think it is. And perhaps we'll be able to, oops. And I think we'll be able to maybe talk about that in, who knows, a year.
Oh.
Okay. So, although there is already a Spanish group, as you know, but each person, I think, will probably do it a little bit differently. I think that's it. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. So basically, based on your experience, would you say there is a difference between students' language skills development in face-to-face classes and online classes? For example, it looks like that students in online classes seem to have more language development in areas like reading and writing rather than speaking.
Well, again, one focus of the course is on speaking, right? And the interviews. And during the session itself, there is the option for the students to speak or to write. They do so in one form or another, and then one of the last activities is speaking. My feeling is that perhaps for speaking, students do have a little bit more time in the face-to-face classroom to develop their speaking abilities. But in generally speaking, the example that I think I gave showed that they are able to maintain sort of the same kind of competency that students do have in the face-to-face classroom. My feeling is, though, that students learn faster in the online environment. And if you take a look at, well, the only thing I'll give you right now is the example of the essay. The essay that they wrote, what they did in 12 weeks, and the other essay that you wrote in the face-to-face classroom was done in 2 semesters. So there may be some differences, and that requires research. I can't say with absolute certainty, but my feeling at this point, anecdotally, is that they are close.
How about the issue of your time and how much time it took you to initially develop this, and then how much less time? Did you get the same class in different semesters?
Yes.
So did you spend a lot of time developing it initially, and then was it less time after that?
Right.
To develop it, and then also with your interaction with students, how does that compare to a face-to-face, planning the course, interacting with students, et cetera, face-to-face versus online?
That's a good question. I spent a lot more time than I wanted to when I was putting the course together. In fact, I think I was eating and breathing the course the first semester that I did it. And as I did it when I did it the second year, there was less time spent on it. I knew exactly what I wanted. I knew to do what I wanted to accomplish. Felt more confident with it. And then the second part of your answer is to your question of, what was the second part?
No, it's about how much time you spend planning and interacting with students and grading online versus face-to-face.
Right. Well, the online environment does take more time because of the fact that what I'm doing is I'm looking more closely at content, and that type of assessment requires more time. But then again, I developed this sort of feedback mechanism that I'm using now that takes less time, and I make them more responsible for correcting their work. So that's shortened down some of the time needed to be able to really go in there and look at their essays for errors. And in terms of planning the course, it's interesting because now I'm planning the course, sometimes the face-to-face course, thinking in the same way that I'm planning the online course. So the cycle that you saw here, that I use in the online class, wasn't something that I did in the face-to-face class. I am doing that now, actually, in the face-to-face classroom now too. And
Follow-up question: how many students do you have in a face-to-face class, and how many students do you have in each online class?
Well, in my face-to-face classrooms, I have generally 12 to 16. In the online classrooms, it could be anywhere from, say, 6 to 9. So they are smaller, but more intense.
Yeah, and they take more time.
Yes?
Can you see the online class with a class of 30 students?
Well, that's really a good question. Oops, I better stand over here. Again, it would be done. The focus of a larger online class, I can see, let's say if it was a MOOC, would be actually social practice. There needs to be a lot of social practice in it. And the feedback that, or the response that I'd be getting from the students with regards to how they are self-correcting would be an important component in a sort of a larger classroom. So I can see it as a possibility, but I haven't done it yet. Probably one thing to take a look at is to see how it was done in the Spanish MOOC, where they had, I think, 2,000 students in the class. Yes?
You use a variety of technology tools. So did your students need help with learning how to use those tools? And did they run into any technical issues? And if so, how did you handle those issues and who helped them?
Very good question. The students are comfortable with Blackboard, Facebook, Google Docs, that type of thing. But what they really needed help with was the Adobe Connect. And so I met with the students before the class started to go over some of the hazards of the program, where there could be, the sound could fall out. But my experience is that a lot of the errors that occur in the Adobe Connect are user errors. And that if the students know what they're supposed to do, that they're supposed to use ink headsets, that they're supposed to check their computer settings and also to do the wizard, that things will generally work well. And I was very fortunate in the past 2 years, we had technical support. So there was a roaming technical support going throughout the online classes, and if a student was having a problem, then that technical support person was there to help out. However, after the first 2 or 3 weeks, we really didn't need too much more technical support, and so the technical support person was able to wean himself out of the site.
A couple of questions from our distance participants.
Yes.
One person was wondering, how do you deal with students using online translators?
Good. Well, the first year I did this, a student did use an online translator because I could see right away that they used an online translator. The word order was all over the place, or the vocabulary was incorrect. And so I think most teachers can identify that, and I did. And I said to the student, "Are you using an online translator?" And he said to me, "Well, yes." He said, "Because it's an online course, isn't it?" so I asked him to not do that again, and so he so that is the only way in which I think that I can identify it. Another way that I think you can identify whether the students are using online translators is that in their oral work, when they're speaking with you, if there's a sort of a real big mismatch, I think then that is also an indicator that, okay, on this end you're writing beautiful essays, but here you're not able to put a sentence together, then I think then there will be some questions will be raised. Yes?
How are you able to develop students' confidence, I guess, through the online course of face-to-face, like a social interaction face-to-face? A lot of them alluded to their anxiety when speaking, having other classmates watching them in the classroom, but then when that take away from their interaction face-to-face, if they were trying to speak
Online.
with the German students.
You mean online when they're how do you get them to develop their speaking?
Yeah, their speaking confidence. A lot of them said that they were anxious about it or didn't like being in a face-to-face classroom because they felt like
Inhibited?
yeah, with their speaking. But then wouldn't that not be, I guess, addressed in an online classroom as opposed to a face-to-face classroom where they would become more comfortable speaking to another person?
Well,
Face-to-face?
in the online classroom, I think it's the fact that they don't see each other that makes them a little bit more braver or courageous to volunteer new information, about themselves. And it probably has a lot to do with the kind of anonymity that exists in the online environment. However, it's not really totally that anonymous because they are, from day one, as I showed you the Facebook from the first day, they are exchanging information about themselves and developing a social presence. And for one thing, the students are all obligated in the online environment to volunteer information. And in the face-to-face classroom, when a student I notice might be a little bit quiet, sitting in the back of the room, won't raise their hand, and for whatever reason that may be, I find that sometimes there's more silence in the face-to-face classroom, whereas in the online classroom, they're all expected to do something, and it might be that they are doing it either in a written format or a spoken format because of the fact that they feel more anonymous.
I guess my question was more so when they are thrown into a situation, say they went to Germany
Right.
and they were speaking with a German speaker face to face, would that anxiety that they felt from face-to-face interaction affect that?
That's a good question because one of my students I mentioned did go to Germany and got a grant and was there. However, I think that kind of a question, I try to address it this way. The coordinator of the language program is a native speaker, and she does it on the telephone. So, I mean, that is probably the ultimate experience of talking with somebody. It maybe not be physically in person, but that is a huge challenge to be interviewed through a telephone conversation. And I think anything after that would probably be less nerve-wracking. But I can't really tell it. I can't really answer totally your question. It's a very good question, one that I haven't thought about completely, and it would be interesting to see how students interact in a face. But as I do know, the students do continue. They do go on to the intermediate level, and as I mentioned, they transition from the online class to the face-to-face class when they go from elementary German to intermediate, because we don't have online intermediate, and they have been surviving. Yes.
I work with students in an intensive language program they're ESL students, most of them are coming from abroad. They 20 hours a week, face-to-face instruction. Do you think an online class like this would work in the context of an intensive language program where students are paying for the experience of coming overseas and meeting in class face-to-face? Do you think this has a place in that type of learning environment?
I think it does, because the English language program, I believe, at Penn, is doing something that sounds like would be of interest to you, in the sense that they provide sort of an advance. There's before they come to the classroom, they're doing these online sessions before they come, so they're getting sort of acclimated, learning maybe certain topics, instructions, and things like that before they come into the classroom, so that they're able to start speaking from the day one that they enter into the classroom. So it might be a hybrid type of course that you might develop. I'm not quite sure what the course, how intense your course is. It probably is very intense, so I don't want to say definitively yes, you can do this. But I would say it sounds like you could do like a hybrid type of course.
Thank you.
Sarah?
Two more. One of our listeners was wondering about how you teach the students the special characters in German. You know, when and how do you teach those? And do you have any ideas of how you would do this for non-online alphabets, like Japanese or Chinese prototyping or something complicated?
Right. Well, I teach how to create the Umlauts in German, which aren't really that difficult. I give them basically a handout, and giving them instructions on how to create, for instance, the diacritics on a Mac and on a PC, and they pretty much pick it up pretty quickly. I can't answer that question with how it's being done in Chinese. I think it would be better for me to ask my colleague who is teaching the Chinese class and who's teaching the Arabic classes how they're doing that. That's something that I need to look at more closely. I don't have an answer for that off the top of my head. There's a lot of programs, though. There's a lot of apps out there that I just became aware of. I went to a NEAL conference recently, and there's a lot of apps that I saw for practicing speaking. So I'm sure there are probably apps out there for students to be able to practice creating characters in Chinese and in other languages.
Do you teach your students the IPA or it's
No, I don't.
so that we can speak
Well,
pronounce the words?
right. I don't do too much practicing, showing students how to create, the sounds. They practice it, they learn it as they're doing it, as they're working with me. If I notice, though, that there is miscommunication as the result of them not being able to pronounce the words, then I will intercede and I will help them with the pronunciation. They are responsible, basically, for going through the Deutsche Interaktiv that does give them sort of a model for practicing pronunciation. And what I also tried to mention earlier is that because of the fact that they don't see each other, there's no hand gestures going on, they are really much more focused on trying to pronounce as correctly as they possibly can. So I think they're learning pronunciation on their own by listening to these programs that they're supposed to be using. However, that might be a good suggestion for the future to use these symbols. Does that answer your question?
You cited advantages. What about based on your first professional assessment? What are the disadvantages to online business courses?
The disadvantages?
Or if there's any.
Well, I'm trying to think right now. And for me right now, walking into this classroom and the online is not even much different than walking into the face-to-face classroom. I feel the same energy, the same engagement from the students. It's a different kind of engagement, it's a different kind of energy that's going on. So I don't feel that there's a disadvantage. However, I will say this, last year I did have a class, and one of the students, he was really one of the best students in the online classroom, and he said to me,
after the first week, you know, this is not how I really learn language as well. I'd rather do it in the face-to-face environment. So there are different learners, you know, different learning styles. Some students thrive in it. I gave you the example of students that thrive in it. But there are also students who would prefer the face-to-face environment.
Thank you.
It's just a different formats. I think we're slowly running out of time, but I think we have time for one more question or two more. Or
How many face-to-face online sessions did you have per week? I mean, how often were you meeting in Adobe Connect?
Okay. We were meeting 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday, from 7:30 to 9 o'clock. And then there was also, each student would meet with me on Friday afternoons for a 20-minute interview. So that way I could assess what their concerns were also as well, but also to assess their speaking abilities, their ability to communicate. So it was 5 days a week, but less time on Fridays.
Okay.
But it was in the evening.
You were the first to go online, right, with languages at the University of Pennsylvania. So I was just wondering what infrastructure you've come up with since then for other languages that are going online or going hybrid. Do you all kind of follow the same model or use the same tools? Because that's what we're dealing with right now here at CU.
We're using the same tools. I have presented the teachers with this model here. A lot of them are modifying it based on their languages too, or the needs of their languages. But fundamentally, they're using the same tools. And I've been doing a lot of the training for the new teachers. So that, to give you an example of how they would be trained is that we all get together. We do it sort of like in a very physical room, and we go over through what the technical issues are. But then after the first session where we've done the physical class meeting where we're learning how to use the technology, we then go online. And some of us, now we have about 3 or 4 teachers who have done modeling. They model basically their course. And they teach their language. For example, like a Polish teacher taught a Polish session to the other teachers who are going to be the newbies. And they learned the language, they learned Polish to give them the experience of what a student would be like in an online class. Then the following week, they go online and then they teach their language. For instance, there was teachers teaching Italian a couple of weeks ago, for them then to get the experience of being the teacher. So we all sort of collaborate, we change things, but fundamentally we're using the same tools. Yes?
How many hours of training would you say an instructor goes through before they are prepared to teach this kind of course online?
I would say they need at least probably exposure to it, along with direct experience with it. I would say 10 hours. But I would also say that not all teachers would be able to do this. However, I am convinced that most teachers can. However, some teachers who are more technically savvy will probably thrive in this environment, whereas other teachers may not be as technically savvy, but are very, very, very good teachers. And those are the people we want to be able to support in these online environments, simply because that they are very good teachers and very effective. So I think it can be done by everyone, but some people will need more hand-holding than others. But on an average, I would say about 10 hours. Yes?
On the financial aspect, does it save money to do online distance course in face-to-face classroom?
No, the price of the tuition is the same. The reason why we're doing them in the summertime is to allow students at Penn who are not on campus to be able to take a foreign language. And so we don't do this during the year because everybody's on campus. So, but during the summertime, it's the same tuition, it's the same course with online format, but I don't think that it saves money. In fact, it might need to be more, at this point, a little bit more costly because of the fact that we have a recognition. I'm looking at the clock here, and it seems to be 1 o'clock, and I'm glad, though, to answer any other questions that you have.
after the session, and thank you very much.